you probably don't want to just learn a language for the sake of learning a language. So since learning Chinese in Taiwan here for the past almost 2 years now, I've had my fair share of language exchanges asking me, how can I improve my English? I always try to tell them how I got to learning Chinese. And I think that if there was one thing that really propelled me, that helped me a lot, was that I really tried to apply what I learned as much as possible. I mean, that was the main reason why I came to Taiwan in the first place. It's because I wanted to put myself in the situation where I could apply, where I was forced to apply and to use the language as much as possible. And for, I would say, most language learners, that's the end goal. Most of us probably don't go into learning Mandarin Chinese, learning a specific language to be a linguist, to have a PhD in the language. Most of us go into it with the goal of speaking the language, with the goal of consuming media, being able to consume books, music, being able to make friends in our target language, being able to cultivate relationships. And this is something that I think a lot of language learners can do a lot earlier than they think, even when they're in their beginner stages. I think a lot of learners focus a lot on the didactic aspect of learning a language, going to school, drilling vocabulary, learning from a textbook. And I think all of these things are great. I think they're important. You need to supplement what you're applying. You still need to do the homework, study on your own time. But I think focusing too much on this is also a crutch, because then you're not focusing that much on applying. I think about when I went through medical school, and in the first 2 years, most of it was didactic. A lot of it was lecture material, a lot of it was textbook, and a lot of it we don't really remember, we don't really use. And it wasn't until clerkship, which is the 3rd and 4th year, where we're actually in the wards, we're actually interacting with patients at the bedside, that I actually started using the material that I had learned in the first 2 years. And that's when I started consolidating all that knowledge and started really utilizing and applying that information. It's difficult to learn without actually applying. Think about the last time you were in high school or university and you were forced to drill vocabulary, or you were forced to memorize a lot of terms, a lot of facts, and think about how much of that you actually remember. So just because you're an expert at Chinese grammar, language grammar, maybe you're a linguist, maybe you have a PhD in a language, that's a great skill, but that doesn't necessarily translate to being able to use the language, being able to speak fluently. Maybe you learned your scales really well on the guitar and you're really good at playing scales. Maybe that makes you a really good guitar player, a really good musician, but how well does that translate to you playing songs, making your own songs? To create your own music, you have to practice creating music. When I was studying kinesiology in undergrad, we learned about how to train athletes. And one of the concepts that was really prominent, that was very important, was this concept of specificity, training specificity. How well or how specific is a certain training protocol to an athlete's overall performance? For example, if we're training a basketball player, you can do general training with things like weight training, running on the track, but then you also have to supplement that with very specific training, like learning to shoot the basketball, learning to dribble, learning to pass the ball. These are things that you can't train through just going to the weight rooms, through just running laps. So these are very specific skills that you want to train, and you can only train them by making your training as practical as possible, mimicking real life environment as much as possible. You're trying to mimic that training to a real life basketball game. Same thing with language learning. We do our general training through memorizing vocabulary, maybe practice tests, HSK exams, but practically we want to train ourselves in the arena where there are native speakers, where we can practice the language, where we can listen to the language through podcasts, where we can watch movies. These are all avenues where we can train ourselves practically, specifically. And not only is speaking with a native speaker, training with native material so much more effective, it's also so much more fun. It's so much more motivating because there's interaction. I would argue that you want to learn this language to do cool stuff, to solve cool problems. You probably don't want to just learn a language for the sake of learning a language. You probably want to make new friends in your target language. You probably want to consume music in your language. You probably want to read books in your language. You might want to court a girl. Whatever your interest or motivation may be. For me, in my case, I want to read more books in Chinese. I want to read about Chinese history in Chinese. I want to have more conversations in Chinese, record more podcasts in Chinese, understand more of movies in Chinese. And the beautiful thing is it's personable. depending on every language learner's specific interests and goals, it's very personalizable. So try not to think about learning languages just for the sake of learning languages. That's like trying to learn how to cut onions or trying to learn how to boil water. These are very important skills, but it's just a skill. And these skills are only effective for thinking about what the end result is. What do we want to do with this? All this culinary skill. We probably want to cook something. We want to eat something. We want to eat something good. And so we want to think about what kind of cool problems, what kind of cool stuff we want to do once we've learned this language, or not even once we've learned it. As we're learning it, we can do these cool things. This is going to keep you much more motivated along the way instead of just thinking about this lofty goal at the end of the tunnel. It's going to keep you engaged, and it's also going to let you build and accumulate a lot of cool experiences because you're going to be doing all of these cool things along the way. If you like this video, check out this short playlist I made of a bunch of other Chinese learning tips, language learning tips. See you guys next time.